Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today I'm coming at you with the midweek update in the world of cannabis. So before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it, as it really helps out my channel. And then of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos, and there's plenty of content to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes to learn about the evolution of the industry over time, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you're ready. Now, I'm trying my best to be a light in these very dark times, and I do believe we've gotten through the worst of it, and that we're going to start trending forward into the fall. But there's another person that has been a very bright light through these dark times, and this is our friend CMDR1305 on Reddit. Basically someone who has worked in Washington and has the understanding of how things work there. So he has brought these timely pieces to us before, and he's brought another one called Managing Expectations into the Fall in 2022. If you've not read this, I suggest you do, because I'm not going to spend time reading through it, but worth knowing is that this individual, I'm long several MSOs based on what I consider an overwhelmingly positive outlook for the sector, which I obviously agree with and believe, and you likely do too if you're watching, enormous total addressable market, and a set of leading companies I consider investment worthy. Which basically just tells us that our thesis is still in line with everything that we're seeing unfold. Now, I'm going to scroll down and just tell you the ending of this, but I would encourage you to read the whole thing. But what he just says is expect to be surprised, based on highlighting everything that he thinks is important to add. I don't think I can write this whole piece without offering some prediction. Now keep in mind, this is just his prediction based on his experience and his knowledge of working in Washington. However, so here it is, expect to be surprised. As I said above, I expect that the reforms needed to allow cannabis companies to access capital markets, list on big exchanges, remove 280E, and allow for digital use of currency will find their way into larger and more complex bills. As such, when the day comes that you read safe banking language is in the bill that is expected to pass in the Senate, I expect you will be surprised. Put it another way, I do not expect a public and slow process. The CAOA got a press conference, a formal discussion draft, and will likely continue to be talked about in a public way going forward. I would not be surprised to see advance notification from Senator Schumer on the development of a proposed bill or the introduction of said bill and its referral to committee. I believe that the CAOA will continue to publicly move, stall, change, and develop as we watch. Meanwhile, the smaller reforms needed for investors to see uplisting will go from 0 to 60 the moment it happens. So again, don't take this as a 100% truth. Just consider it as another perspective and weigh it against what you know. And do you think, is this possible? Is this how it's likely going to happen? So expect to be surprised. Expect to wake up one day or be eating lunch one afternoon to news that moves the markets. It may not be in September or October. It may not be this fall. But I expect that the day before it happens, to be just like any other day. Somewhere in the Senate office will be a file with a draft that includes language for uplisting. It will be exactly what the industry needs, because that isn't a mystery, right? The industry's been lobbying for this for a long time, and it will be in the middle of a budget bill where it will largely go unnoticed. You won't see it coming, and podcasts won't cover it. Average people won't know whatever happened, and some of us, even watching even closely, could miss it at first. But when, not if, it happens, it will be quiet in Washington and loud on Wall Street. Reforms will lead to custodial changes, and institutional investments will move in. Retail will hold, others will buy more. Old analysts will upgrade, and new analysts will initiate coverage. The narrative hasn't changed. The investment thesis still makes a ton of sense, and right now the landscape ahead is full of positives, and I completely agree. There are key hurdles that that need to be overcome before the re-rate and inflows can happen, but I remain convinced that the chessboard is set up in favor of investors. You just need to see the whole board. And so as he writes that, this is just one thing that I wanted to add. To be clear, this does not mean I expect SAFE to pass in its current form. I still stand by the belief that safe harbor and uplisting language will more likely be found on page 283 of and this is just a hypothetical, 1,425-page budget bill than a standalone measure. And then what I decided to do is go pull up this bill, which is the HR 4502. This is the Minibus bill, making appropriations for the Department of Labor, Health, Human Services, Education, and related agencies for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2022. And I believe this bill has a deadline of September 30th, 2021. If we go Control F and we type in marijuana, we get to page 501 of a 1,040-page document. Now again, this is what the language that has been added to this bill. Section 629. None of the funds made available in this act may be used to penalize a financial institution solely because the institution provides financial services to an entity that is a manufacturer, a producer, or a person that participates in any business or organized activity that involves handling hemp, hemp-derived cannabinoid products, or other hemp-derived cannabinoid products, marijuana, marijuana products, or marijuana proceeds, and engages in such activity pursuant to a law established by a state, political subdivision of a state, or Indian tribe. In this section, the term state means each of the several states, the District of Columbia, and any territory or possession of the United States. Now, does this allow for uplisting and removal of 280E? I don't know. I don't think so. This is so far what we have. But I just find it's funny that based on when this guy who has the experience in Washington says this, we can actually look and find that some language has been added in. So it's just very reasonable to believe that we can expect to be surprised, much like he said. But just to the extent of how much this covers, we don't know, but we're going to have to pay attention and watch, and that's obviously what I'm going to be covering and trying to cover as this unfolds. But nonetheless, just keep in mind, none of the funds available in this act, so new money being sent, may be used to penalize a financial institution solely because the institution provides financial services. And again, does that financial services allow uplisting? We don't know. But I just wanted to show you this because this clearly is them sliding language into the bill, not telling anybody and being sneaky about it. So that's very positive, and this did come after this tweet from Santiago Dunbar. Not like he's a big person on Twitter or anything. Claims to be a PhD, health and wellness scientist, author, Virginia alumni, but he's clearly following this as well, and highlights that safe banking is in the recently approved House Minibus bill, and that's so then I checked. This is not all of safe banking language, but obviously this is better than nothing being in there. Under the radar, and insiders believe it will face little opposition in the Senate. 9:30 is the deadline. It's happening exactly like Brady Cobb said it would, so this makes me very optimistic. And this is why you want to have patience to watch this all unfold, because I think this is a great step, and it just highlights that, give some credibility to what this person says. Expect to be surprised? Well, we've got some language in here, so it's a good start. Then I want to move on to this article from the Financial Times highlighting who is actually working with these cannabis companies then. Because Banking on Cannabis, the new network of lenders for a semi-legal industry, still illegal at the federal level, industry has to pay high fees for financial services from less well-known firms. So let's learn a little bit more about this. When Scott Garambone and his partners in California started selling weed in 2018, they hoped to make a lot of money. They just did not expect to spend so much time counting it. Their company, Dreamfields, based in a small town of Desert Hot Springs, pulled in more than $2 million in revenue that year, all of it in cash, according to Garambone, which is very dangerous. The group could not take electronic payments, and there was no banking willing to hold their deposits. This left Garambone and his colleagues, who had self-funded their business in the absence of any bank loans, to deal with the money and the risk of theft themselves. We would spend the entire day just counting and paying people in cash. We did that for about a year, Dreamfield's chief financial officer said. Cannabis companies such as Dreamfields are caught in a gap between state and federal laws. So it's like these companies, which are all across the U.S., are the ones that also need SAFE desperately, plus the social equity applicants and entrepreneurs that are going to join the industry as well. Despite California making cannabis legal for recreational use in 2016, the federal government still classifies cannabis as an illegal substance. With top U.S. banks such as JP Morgan and Wells Fargo, so these are the big institutions we think of that will not be touching this yet, and payments companies including Visa and MasterCard adhering to federal law, they have opted out of serving cannabis companies. But think about the moment that these Visa, MasterCard, JP Morgan, and Wells Fargo are allowed to deal with cannabis companies like any other company. It's going to be a wonderful day. But now, 3 years later, Garambone says Dreamfields is doing almost all of its transactions electronically, taking out loans and making deposits. So that's a big deal. This is despite the lack of meaningful progress at the federal level to bridge the gap with state law. So regardless of federal law, because they seem to understand that state law supersedes federal law, so they think it's worth taking the risk. And instead, relief has largely come thanks to a small group of financial service companies that has sprouted up to cater to the cannabis industry. I see now that we probably do about 98% of our payments electronically, and we bring everything into the bank, Garambone says. Now, with numbers such as that, cannabis can make a credible claim of being the largest underbanked industry in the entire U.S. And it's not for lack of trying by some lawmakers. So we see here the Safe Banking Act has been passed many times through the House. This is the bill that would explicitly allow federal regulated banks to work with cannabis companies in states where cannabis is legal. We know the bill passed the House again in April, and it just has to be brought onto the Senate. And if we're waiting on Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader added some momentum to normalize federal treatment of cannabis in August, and this is referring to the CAOA when he published a separate draft bill to legalize cannabis. But given the size of the cannabis industry, someone was bound to try and fill the vacuum, and this is referring to the discrepancy between state and federal law. In the absence of federal action, a new network of companies has sprung up to service the industry, often charging lucrative fees that would be hard-pressed to receive elsewhere. The cannabis industry desperately needs access to financial services, says Karan Wadhera, managing partner at Casa Verde, a fund that invests in companies in the cannabis industry. We think companies targeting this problem are among the most compelling businesses in the industry from an investment standpoint. That's a very good point to make, and it just adds to the fact that, well, why would this language be added in? Because an entire industry needs banking really, really badly. It's going to help a lot of businesses. So we're going to scroll down, though. So there's a lot to this article, but main things to highlight. at least down here, is just the fact that the illicit cannabis market was worth $66 billion in 2020, estimates said, more than 3 times the size of the actual legal market, New Frontier data estimates. This was chiefly from states that have not yet fully decriminalized cannabis, but illicit sellers are also competitive in states where consumers can make legal purchases. In California, legal cannabis sales for recreational use totaled $4.5 billion, but it was dwarfed by the estimated $8 billion in illicit sales. But so if you just take a look at this chart, it just goes to show how much potential illicit market share there is to bring into a legal market if you supply the demand legally and create the market in states that now prohibit it. And as we can see here, it's a lot of the states that were early to legalize first, whether for medicinal or adult use, that have captured much of that illegal market share. But look how much is still out there to capture, especially in California, the biggest cannabis market in the world, Pennsylvania, Florida. Think of these states with big populations. New Jersey, New York. Think of how much that's going to eat up. Texas would be the other one in here. Is Texas even on here? Texas doesn't even seem to be on here. And that's a population of 30 million people. So that's crazy too. Why is Texas not even on here? But regardless, I just want to go down to the last line because this one's really worth referencing. For Jerome Bone, so someone in the industry that's been working in it and sees the full potential, though the direction of travel is clear and the cannabis industry's growth will continue to force progress, everyone is going to wake up, he says. They're going to realize all the money that's in it. Cannabis is a gold mine. And I mean, that's why this is called a generational opportunity. Not just by me, but by many others referencing that, again, the fundamentals do not line up with the reality that we're seeing out there and with share prices. And typically over time, valuations do always catch up to fundamentals. And then just to highlight, from Jeremy Burke here on Twitter, who writes for Business Insider, one thing that's eminently clear from cannabis earnings this past quarter: regular old flower is still king. And I've said this many times, but I'll say it again. Regardless of how many innovations they have, obviously pre-rolls are easy for convenience and for users that don't consume cannabis very often. And vape pens, edibles, concentrates, it's all cool and has its own effect and use case. But at the end of the day, good old flower just does what it's supposed to do. It helps make suffering bearable if you're in any sort of pain or whatnot. And at the end of the day, for a consumer like myself, it helps me get to sleep, helps me be more creative, helps me unwind when I choose to use it. And as we can see in Canada and the US market share, flower still holds 51.5%, 46%. So this is presented by Business Insider and sourced from headset.io, but tells us what we've already known. Flower is king at the end of the day. On to this one from Mark Joseph Stern, who is a staff writer from Slate. He highlights this, which also came out of left field. This was August 30th. Judge Watford says that the courts may soon order the reclassification of cannabis under the Controlled Substances Act, writing that the DEA has likely misinterpreted the controlling statute by concluding that cannabis has no concurrently accepted medical use. So for him to say that the DEA is likely misinterpreting the controlling statute is basically Judge Watford giving the DEA a slap on the wrist, saying that, although they might have done this incorrectly in the past, we might be forcing them to reclassify cannabis under the CSA soon. And so we're just going to say this as opposed to saying that, the DEA just didn't want to acknowledge what we've known for a very long time themselves, and they wanted to stick to the status quo. That's what I get out of this, but obviously this is a big deal because if a judge is saying that courts may soon order the reclassification of cannabis under the Controlled Substances Act. So regardless, I think this is important to note that no one was expecting anything like this, but the fact that a judge is saying that the courts may soon order the reclassification is a very big deal. So obviously this is a new development. I will be reporting on this, but better to have this sort of development than not, right? On to some MSOs. Ascend Wellness Holdings announces $210 million senior debt financing. So another company getting debt financing long-term for 4-year term, but bearing interest under 10%. So this one, Ascend Wellness manages to score 9.5%, which is another industry low compared to some other companies. So the refinancing existing debt lowers their cost of capital, and it strengthens the balance sheet to support investment towards future growth strategies. So today, Ascend Wellness announces that it has closed a US $210 million senior secured term loan with Seaport Global Securities LLC as lead manager. And then Ascend Wellness intends to use the proceeds to, 1, repay substantially all of the company's debt, excluding approximately US $12 million of outstanding acquisition payments with near zero interest rates, 2, finance the company's pending investment in MedMen New York, and 3, support the company's future growth and acquisition initiatives. This term loan further strengthens the company's strong cash position. Prior to closing the term loan at the end of Q2 2021, ending June 30th, 2021, the company had $104.2 million cash and cash equivalents. But just note that this is debt, so it does not dilute existing shareholders in any form. There's no extra equity being raised. The term loan will bear interest of 9.5% per annum, payable quarterly in arrears with the maturity date of August 27, 2025. The term loan is secured by the first lien on all company assets, and subject to certain conditions of this agreement, the company has the ability to increase the facility by up to $65 million if desired, so another $65 million on top of the $210. So whoever's lending clearly sees opportunity in doing this. Plus, we have this from Weed Street 420, so thank you for tweeting this information out, as Green Thumb Insiders just sold another 86,792 shares at $30 USD to qualified institutional investors. So it's not selling it on the open market. They're selling some of their shares to qualified institutional investors that clearly think owning Green Thumb shares at the price of 30 is going to be a good investment in time because they're going to be worth a lot more in the future. And the price of this many shares at $30 totals $2.6 million. So it's not a small investment. It's not the first time institutions are buying GTI in the last month, which could explain why GTI of all MSOs is holding gains better than its peers. And so if we take a look at the sheet here, still sort of like hieroglyphics to me. I don't fully understand what's going on here, but as it's detailed, it seems like the shares have been sold from insiders to institutional investors. And obviously, this is the SEC form right here highlighting that. So just goes to show that there are institutional investors out there that do see the opportunity in the cannabis space, much like I do and much like you do as well. Plus, a medical cannabis company is expected to bring 100 million and 40 new jobs to DeLand. So if you do not see the fact that this industry getting treated like others and expanding, the good that it brings, jobs, tax revenue, and opportunities to cities and small rural areas that don't have any sort of businesses that are still operating there. This is, again, a big deal. And the city of DeLand, which is in Florida, has been working to recruit new businesses in the area and say they've hit it out of the park with a medical cannabis company locating their Florida headquarters there. The business, called Cookies, has moved into a 400,000 square foot manufacturing site once owned by the Brunswick Corporation. It's one of the largest vacant business sites in the city, and officials are anxious to see it in use again. While the staff at Cookies can't share all their secrets, they did share they'll be using it for distributing, manufacturing, and growing. And they're going to be doing their entire operations out of the property, Chris Graham, DeLand spokesperson, said. DeLand is the company's foothold in Florida after acquiring one of the state's 22 medical cannabis treatment center licenses last year. City officials say that the company's operation will be a $100 million economic boost, bringing in at least 400 new jobs when the build-out is complete. And that's what rural America needs, jobs. So it's just unbelievable to see, states that have reformed their laws see the opportunity in this. They're benefiting from it actively, where states that don't see it, woe is me, we would just want to stay the way we are. Well, sadly, that just gets in the way of a lot of progress that you could be seeing if you, turn the new page. But as far as capital investment goes, this is one of the largest here in the city. So that is huge for our tax base, Graham said. On to some state developments as efforts to legalize cannabis in Ohio clears another hurdle. So this is big. An effort to legalize cannabis use and sales in Ohio has cleared another hurdle on the path to getting the proposal submitted to the legislature. The Ohio Ballot Board, a panel of legislative appointees led by Secretary of State Frank LaRose, voted Monday to approve the proposed statute from the Coalition to Regulate Cannabis like Alcohol as a single issue. And the decision means the group can start gathering the nearly 133 valid signatures needed to submit the proposed state law to the Ohio legislature, which will have 4 months to act on it. So that's big. If they can act quickly and get these 133,000 signatures, within 2 months, that means the legislature has 2 months to possibly legalize sooner than later. But if it doesn't, the measure will be placed on the Ohio ballot in 2022. So worst case scenario, it's still going to be voted on in the ballot. But the fact that they've given the green light, I imagine these Ohioan activists are going to be working on that. The coalition wants to make it legal for adults 21 and older to buy and possess 2.5 ounces of cannabis and grow as many as 6 plants inside their home. So I really hope that we get pleasantly surprised and that Ohioans do pull this off. That would be great. That would just be added bonus before the end of the year. On to this news as well from Missouri. The push is on to make Missouri the 20th state to legalize recreational cannabis as well. And so the group filed a citizens ballot initiative with the Missouri Secretary of State's office that would allow residents 21 and older to possess, grow, and use cannabis. The proposed constitutional amendment includes a 6% retail tax that is expected to generate millions of dollars in state revenue annually. Local governments would also be able to collect a 3% tax on cannabis. Organizers say there's a focus on criminal justice reform, and Missourians with low-level cannabis offenses would have their records expunged, which is also a huge positive there too. They plan to begin collecting the 175,000 signatures needed to qualify for the November 2022 ballot. So sadly, they can't get this done as soon as Ohio, but still, that's going to see Missouri likely on the ballot for 2022, and I imagine that's going to be an astounding yes. And we have this article from Marijuana Moment. Medical cannabis saved former NFL player from downward spiral, he tells Louisiana lawmakers. So I just want to highlight this quote, and we're going to go through this a little bit. I felt it was worth the risk of committing a crime, and sadly, when something shouldn't be a crime, you shouldn't feel bad about sort of violating it, but regardless, it's a whole nother argument. I felt good physically, and in my head was much clearer. I felt free from the downward spiral. So what downward spiral is he talking about? Well, former New Orleans Saints player Steve Gleason said Friday that medical cannabis saved him from a downward spiral after his ALS diagnosis. Friday marked the first time Gleason has ever spoken publicly about his use of the drug. He was testifying before the Medical Cannabis Commission set up by Louisiana legislature. The former special team standout Gleason was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, in 2011 and entered the meeting room at the state capitol in his motorized wheelchair, a result of the neuromuscular disease taking away his use of all muscle functions. Speaking through a computer that tracks his eye movements, Gleason drew laughter when he began his testimony by pointing out how he came dressed in a tuxedo, which was actually just a tuxedo t-shirt. He cracked similar jokes throughout the speech, but captivated the entire room when describing a dark point in his life in 2013. Doctors had recommended that he put a hospital bed in his home to sleep in and prescribed him medications for the pain and anxiety that accompanies the disease. So, wonder what led him down that potential spiral. He described how the hospital bed had bars on the sides that were designed to keep the patient from rolling off. The irony was I was there staring at the ceiling without any ability to move. I was angry and resentful. This was something of a downward spiral. The side effects of the prescription medication only made things worse, he said. He tried different types of dosages, but nothing seemed to work. The physical discomfort brought an overwhelming fear to his mind, he said. One day he told his wife, "I have to get out of this. There must be a better way." And then, sure enough, a friend recommended medical cannabis. Gleason had only tried cannabis a few times prior to that point, smoking it recreationally, but his friend was recommending something different, a cannabis tincture, which is a pharmaceutical-grade liquid extract. The drug was still illegal in Louisiana at the time. Thank God for that friend, because sure enough, it felt it was worth the risk of committing a crime, but just for safe measure, I did bring our attorney, Gleason said, drawing another round of laughter. For the first time in a while, he said, I was able to function, had more energy, and was more productive. I felt good physically and my head was much clearer, he said. I felt free from the downward spiral. So it's just worth noting my experience of moving from pain to productivity. The new solution allowed me to wean off of prescription pharmaceuticals completely. I felt good physically and my head was much clearer. I felt healthy, I felt energized, I felt free from the downward spiral my body and my mind had experienced with pain and anxiety pills. Until today, I've not been publicly vocal about the positive experience that I've had with medical cannabis, but I regularly recommend it to people I am friends with if they are using opioids or other pharmaceuticals. From my experience, medical cannabis is a much better solution than pills. And he adds, I fully understand the fragile nature of my life, not so different than any of you. I'm healthier than I have been in the past decade. I'm energized, I'm flourishing, I'm free. I want to be clear here. I'm not saying that all the epic things that I've been able to accomplish, all the people I've inspired, or the people from our foundation has been able to help. I'm not saying that all this has happened simply due to medical cannabis, but I can say with 100% confidence, none of those accomplishments, the inspiration, nor the tens of thousands of people who we serve, none of that happens if I were still on those prescription pills. So we need more testimony like this, so thank you, Steve Gleason, for telling your story. And this is obviously big for the lawmakers of Louisiana. I hope they take it seriously and take action based on it, because this is the sort of testimony we need, more people sharing their story of cannabis, helping them, bringing them back to life. And ultimately, the more stories like this, the better, and the more reform we will see sooner than later. Plus, this comes from the Vancouver Sun. There was no spike in traffic-related injuries after cannabis was legalized, according to a study. So this is another great piece of data that we can use to shun any doubters that refuse to look at new information and want to stick to what they believe to be true, as 5 years of pre- and post-legalization data in Alberta and Ontario shows no evidence of significant changes. So neither Ontario nor Alberta, far and away, the leaders in the number of cannabis stores in the country, have witnessed a significant rise in emergency visits from traffic-related injuries since cannabis got the green light 3 years ago. Implementation of the Cannabis Act was not associated with evidence of significant post-legalization changes in traffic injury emergency department visits in Ontario or Alberta among all drivers, or youth drivers in particular, notes the new Canadian study in drugs and alcohol dependence. So you can grab that here. The links will all be below if you want to check that out. Published last week, researchers sought to get firm numbers after some have expressed concerns about how recreational cannabis legalization could influence road-related injuries, particularly with respect to youth drivers. Keep in mind, though, cannabis is not the same as alcohol, and people don't all of a sudden just want to get behind the wheel and think that they can do anything they want. To get the firm numbers, investigators considered weekly drivers' traffic injuries to all EDs in Ontario and Alberta from the start of April 2015, 3 years before legalization, through the end of 2019. Participants were broken down by province into two groups, all drivers and those 14 to 17 in Alberta and 16 to 18 in Ontario. And as we can see, there was no evidence of significant changes associated with cannabis legalization on post-legalization weekly counts of driver traffic, injury, ED visits, researchers' rights. So this is very positive. More data is good for us, and it helps plead our case that obviously legalization is better for societies and for economies than not at all. And so it is September 1st today. This is the last day for the public comment periods for Schumer's bill, and he should be releasing the official draft bill of the CAOA at some point in the future. But I do believe Congress is still off until the 13th of September, so go figure, they get a longer vacation while their staff, I imagine, is working very hard through this time. But regardless, that is it for today's episode. Lots of great developments that are very positive again for the industry in time as we head in that direction. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think about the stories and the fact that safe language has been added to the bill? I think that's obviously very positive, and I do think we're going to see more developments unfold into the fall, but obviously we're just going to have to wait and see. So if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I would love to have a discussion. If you enjoyed this video though, or you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe if you don't want to miss any more videos, and I'll catch you on Sunday with This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great week, everybody.